Pelina mai e nā akua, nā aumakua, nā kupuna, a mea kākou e ea mai nei no ka lāhui Hawaiʻi. Aloha pumehana kākou. O wau no o Mahina Kaomea, no ka ʻaina momona o Iole Ka'a I loko o Ea. I'm Mahina Kaomea from the lands of Iole Ka'a in Ea, and I'm bringing my kupuna wahine, Mary Kaholi, with me in spirit today. She signed the ku'e petitions against the annexation of Hawaii when she was just around my age. And then she went on to become a la'o lapa'o. So I'm hoping to channel both the political and the healing aspects of her being in my role as moderator for this panel. First, I'd like to acknowledge that this is just one descendant of an expansive genealogy of Aloha Aina and of La Hoʻihoʻi Ea in particular. Mahalo to the Hawaii People's Fund for supporting this series. I think of my kumu today, and also of Dr. Kekuni Blaisdell, who reestablished the modern La Hoʻihoʻi Ea celebrations in 1985. Historical celebrations of La Hoʻihoʻi Ea began on July 31st, 1843, when the Hawaiian Kingdom reclaimed its sovereignty as the High Hawaii was raised in what is now known as Thomas Square. So if you aren't familiar with it already, I'd really encourage everyone who's watching to learn this history. LaHoʻihoʻiEa.org is a great place to start. And as a note, our events page is now live. So you can find all July 2020 La Hoʻihoʻi Ea events on that site. And I'd also encourage watching Pa'akeaupuni, The Real History of Hawaii, to learn more. Before we begin, I'd like us to center our thoughts on a quote from Frantz Fanon. And it was something he said back in 1961. He said, "We revolt simply because, for many reasons, we can no longer breathe." I think of the way these words, "I can't breathe," have been reclaimed as a rallying cry in the global uprising against police brutality, systemic racism, white supremacy, and the ongoing assault on Black bodies and Black lives. I also think of the word ea, which means breath, as well as life and sovereignty. And the interplay between these words reminds me that our struggles and our resistance do not and could never exist in isolation, because settler colonialism is built both on the stolen lands of indigenous peoples and on the enslavement of Africans. And therefore, my breath is bound to your breath. My life is bound to your life. My ea is bound to your ea. And it is in this spirit of collective ea and solidarity that I invite our panelists to introduce themselves. So could you please each share your name, the Aina communities you come from, and then an ancestor you'd like to bring with you today?
Aloha kākou. Ova o kaiaka hina li'i ka opua mai ka aina o Manoa. Aloha everyone, my name is Kaiaka hina li'i. I'm from the aina of Manoa here in the moku of Kona Oahu. Today, I would like to bring my great-great-grandmother, Helen Kaheana Nui Kaiwahaolani Mahiki Ka'ai Maunu. She was a Hana no Ea practitioner, a healer, from the moku of Ha'ena on Kauai. And I was just doing a bunch of research about her recently, and just kind of how Mahina shared, she was a healer, and she was also very active in her community, and she had a lot of aloha for everyone. And that's the kind of energy that I want to bring today to this panel, and mahalo for having me.
Hello, I'm Desiree. I'm from Michigan. I'm the logistics director for Hawaii for Black Lives. I would like to bring my grandmother, Rosalind Floyd, here today because I get my political activism from her being a Black Panther in the 60s.
Aloha no kākou. It's great to be here. My name is Anela Howard, and I'm from the Aina of Kalihi. And one ancestor I'd like to bring with me is my grandmother on my mom's side because she's been steadfast all throughout the 19th century, and she had to live through a lot of like language suppression, and I feel that I get a lot of strength from her.
Hi, I'm Taliaferro. I'm from the Hina, like right here in Honolulu. I'm the executive director for Hawaii for Black Lives, and I'm bringing my granny. Sorry, I just forgot her name off the top of my head. I'm bringing my granny, Alice Edward. She was an amazing woman, and I get a lot of my strength from her.
Mahalo, everyone. Some of you touched on this already, but my next question, if you can elaborate a little further, my next question is, how have you been involved in youth organizing and activism? And also, what first activated or inspired your involvement? So could you please choose one powerful moment and tell us that story?
I can go first. So I think I credit a lot of my activism and just awareness of things going on in the world and the community to my family and my parents specifically. I feel really privileged to have parents who raised me to be conscious of not just myself, but everything going around in the community and around the world, and being exposed to these struggles at a young age. For example, one of my earliest memories as a kid, I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and they took me to a protest at the palace, at Iolani Palace, where we were protesting the celebration of Statehood Day, and that was one of my earliest memories, for example. But I also think that I credit the school that I attended to really activating my activism, Halakumana New Century Public Charter School, and all of the kumu and my peers there. That kula and that wahi really just provided me the space and the opportunities and the guidance as a Native Hawaiian, as a young Native Hawaiian, to navigate all of these different historical injustices and, really be able to work together to cultivate cultural values and instill them inside of me, and also, being able to work towards solutions for the betterment of our community. So with that, I think a specific moment that I really believe was the turning point for me was the first rally that I ever went to with Hello Kumana when I was in 7th grade. We went to, we had a protest where we were protesting the use of genetically modified organisms in Hawaii, and it was a march from Thomas Square to the state capitol. And I just remember walking with the lehu lehu and chanting with all of my classmates and my teachers and all of these community members, and it was one of the first experiences for me, and it was completely life-changing. And it was a moment where I knew that this was something that I will dedicate my life to, and what I want to be doing for a career and then for the rest of my life.
So what sparked my activism is my grandmother, like I said, and my mother, my mother was born in the 60s, and my grandmother was a Black Panther. So she was always fighting for Black lives and Black rights and making sure that we were equal to everybody and that we weren't forgotten. I think that's what sparked my activism. My parents always made sure that I knew that I faced racial injustices and that I was going to have to fight for my people and to make sure that we're not forgotten, and how our voices need to be heard, and that we should push for just justice for all people, because in eyes we all are the same, but we just have people that believe that they're better than us. So that I'm just going to have to be stronger. One memory I have is when I was younger. I didn't live in America, so I lived in Korea, and so we, during the Ferguson riots, couldn't really participate on the with the people back home. So we had our own protest, and it went from our church down to our police station, and we sang, and it was just that's what sparked my activism, and when I knew I had to fight for my culture and make sure that I could be the future that we needed.
Thank you guys for those powerful words. I've been involved in youth organizing since I was basically like in 3rd grade. That's when a lot of it started. I've been heavily involved because of my parents with Hawaiian charter school movements. And so the charter school movements, I'd say, was like my kind of first ventures into youth activism. But what first activated my inspiration for and my involvement has to be my ancestry, my mo'oku auhau. And ever since I was young, learning the history of our ancestors, it runs through all of our bloods, activism, and being able to organize, being able to step up for what we believe in. I think it runs in my blood. And the first activation, I guess, like my first kind of really powerful moments, I was still in elementary school, and I always remembered my first charter school was Halal-o-Kahi, which got shut down when I was in middle school. But back in elementary school, a powerful moment was we always would go to the state capitol, both Halal-o-Kahi and Halau-Kumana, which I later went to. But the two of those sister schools coming together in a huge rotunda for the same purpose, I just remember having this extremely pa'a feeling within me. Halal-o-Kahi was there with the oli most of the time, and Halau-Kumana with beautiful, awesome hula. And it was just so dynamic. Most of the time, Halal-o-Kahi was in blue, and Halau-Kumana was in red. And it really showed the unity that we have in our Hawaiian community. Mahalo.
Unlike a lot of the other panelists, my parents were never someone that was politically active into activism. We occasionally had talks about politics, but it never was something that was really strong for them. In middle school, where I really got into politics, really got into humanitarian issues. We used to march for higher teacher wages when I was raised in Kentucky. We marched for gun control. So a lot of other things that I had become like push into activism for wasn't necessarily because of my parents. And I think that resonates with a lot of other teenagers here. A lot of the times we see a lot of things on social media that really makes us have this pit in our stomach, especially recently that pushed a lot of other youth into activism, which was with watching George Floyd's video and countless others and seeing the injustice that was happening and feeling like there was nothing for them to do. And I think that a lot of the times that's really what pushes people to get into an activism spotlight. And I think that that's why it's so important to take steps, see that you're on social media and seeing all these other things that are happening and being like, I want to do something. I think really what sparks getting actually active apart from off of social media was definitely this year, just because I had the opportunity to organize a march. Because I wasn't able to do that in other times. It was more so a participating, not a leading role. And I think that really applies to a lot of other youth that are just now organizing now. We're finally getting the opportunity and we're finally getting taken seriously on our beliefs and our views, and we're able to be pushed into the spotlight and being platformed to be able to have the views and to be able to advocate for the things we believe in. So
Mahalo, everyone. I think in really instrumental ways, I think each of the moments that you folks mentioned have also been big inspirations for me. Hina, I remember seeing pictures of that non-GMO march that you mentioned, I think in one of your mama's books, but seeing those images and seeing students so passionately involved and never feeling that myself at that young age and really wanting to. So thank you for being a part of that, and thank you for that inspiration. I think very much the same with the Black Lives Matter march that Desiree and Nikkya, you folks put together. It's really an inspiration to see youth doing such big organizing, and I think when I first saw the pictures and I didn't read the words, I didn't know it had come from youth. And when I read that, it was just amazing to hear. I also think about how many of us are really lucky to have ohana that have brought us in to organizing and activism. And I can't wait to see what will come next now that, you know, you folks will be the makua of the next generation. And it's really exciting to see where they'll go to. So kind of along those lines, my next question is, thinking about all the meanings of ea, which I kind of brought up earlier, what life, breath, and sovereignty-driven futures do you imagine for your community?
I think for myself personally, ea is so vast and has so many meaningful and beautiful definitions. So I think there are just many aspects that come to mind when I think of healthy and positive futures for our communities. But I think for myself personally, and specifically for what I'm studying now and for what I want to do with the rest of my life, I think the goals that I want to achieve are emphasizing the importance of Indigenous forms of education for future generations, and, you know, just reestablishing pilina relationships with the land that we take care of, and just creating schools and having teachers who are ea based and aina based, and just being able to emphasize the importance of ʻike kupuna, ʻike Hawaiʻi, ʻike aina within our education systems, because that's really the foundation of it all, I believe. When you grow up with this type of mindset, when you grow up with this internal core values of malamaing aina and malamaing place, understanding the stories and the histories and the importance of all of it, it kind of translates to the rest of the world and how you see other people, how you see their aina. And I think at the core of it, it just gives us all a sense of empathy and accountability to each other. So yeah, ea futures for me, definitely establishing more Hawaiian-based, ea-based charter schools and schools for not just Kānaka Hawaii here, but for all of our settler allies. And yeah, I think for me, that's what an ea-based future looks like.
So for me, a future for my community would be educating the young Black community about our ancestors, like she said, because we're not really taught about what happened to us. We know, yes, we were brought here on slave ships, and then we worked in slavery, and we had our civil rights movement. But we could talk about how we had legislators, and they were basically run out of office because we weren't allowed to be equal in the eyes of the American government at the time. I would like to live in a society where we aren't being killed for the color of our skin, and just making our community whole as a family again, and that we're not going to be like broken and we shouldn't fear our lives. So I think that's what a future for my community I would love to see overall.
I'd have to back up Desiree and Hina. My entire life, I've been heavily focused on education, or the influence of education. I remember thinking back, growing up in Kalihi, there's not a lot of like friends that are good influences, and so I was doing public schools until second grade, and even as like a little kid, I found myself on the bad side a lot. But when I came to a charter school, it really did change my entire life. Like, it changes the entire way I perceive the entire world. Like, it really is a really deep understanding of the world and a completely different perspective. So ea also means to rise up, and in the future of our communities, I feel that the youth are gonna be continuing to rise up. The charter school movement and the immersion school movement have been moving strong for a while now, and I feel like if we keep taking those initiatives and putting it at the forefront, then education should be the forefront, and continuing to help each other understand different perspectives around the world, and keeping an open mind can really move us forward. I think one of the highlights of my charter school education is growing up with values. And so Ea is about, as we said, sovereignty, life, breath. But with the charter school values that I grew up with, I've always had these continuous morals like replaying in my head. Like I wouldn't like procrastinate on my homework for like a while because, you know, like that's the thing I have to do. Or thinking about rising up, it gives you a much greater perspective of the world in charter schools. And I feel that that should be the forefront. Honestly, education should be continuing to push forward, because that perspective can really change people's lives and change people's view on different like political or social economic problems. And having that wherewithal can go a long way, in my opinion.
I definitely agree with everyone else's answers when they're talking about education. I truly believe that we need a lot more funding for like what our education is right now. Hawaii schools does definitely have a big issue with education, especially with our lack of teachers, our lack of funding. We have the highest teacher turnover rate, just a lot of things that is contributing to the school to prison pipeline. And that's definitely something that needs to be dismantled, because we have a lot of our kids that could be thriving within our communities, but just aren't getting the support that they need. And they're ending up into our prison system instead of ending up into a job that helps and better prospers their community. So I definitely think that in the future, funding definitely needs to go to our schools, programs, education, definitely needs to be something more valued here in Hawaii. As well as, like Anela was saying, when he was talking about youth being pushed into the spotlight and then continuing to lead things, because of course we are the future. So we should really have a big active role in what is happening in our future, because we're the ones that are having to grow up in it. So I think that definitely needs to be in the spotlight, because of course you don't want people that aren't necessarily going to be affected by future changes to be calling the shots on futures. So I definitely think that continuing to platform and continuing to amplify the voices of our youth, or amplify the voices of the people that are disadvantaged within our community, Micronesians, Native Hawaiians, BIPOC just in general, would definitely help our community continue to prosper and get better.
Mahalo, everyone. Nikkya, what you were just sharing leads us really nicely into the next question that I was going to ask. I did want to think for a second about all the ways that education factored into the futures that each of you are envisioning. And I think that's really powerful, and that's something that's shaped us a lot as youth. I think for this next question, it's also interesting to consider how youth ourselves are shaping education, in some cases the educational system, in some cases through ways we formally or informally educate our peers or those around us. And so with that in mind, I wanted to ask, what role can youth from your community play in driving us towards the futures you articulated?
I think a key thing to keep in mind is always just staying educated on everything that's going on in our communities and around the world, continuing to strive to just be aware and be conscious of everything, and trying your best to put something out there, to be active. A quote that a kumu of mine always would say to me when something would go down would always be, education is the key to liberation. And I just really love that, and I always keep that in mind whenever I think about, futures for Hawaii and just for myself in general, where I'm going with, goals and careers, paths and whatnot. But I think more importantly, understanding our own histories, understanding our culture, and, internalizing it and valuing it, but also, learning the struggles of our fellow people of color, our people not only in Hawaii, and understanding our shared struggles and ways we can improve our communities together, because we're in this together. And I think even just platforms like this are extremely important in terms of moving forward and creating better futures, having discussions like we get to have today with other youth community leaders who we aren't typically, in communication with or whatever. And also just not being afraid to speak up and organize as youth. I think growing up, a lot of the time I thought that I'd have to wait till I was older for people to listen to me, wait till I have more credibility to get things done. But as the school that I went to taught me, the best time is now. And if not now, then when? And if not us, then who? So I think that we need to understand the value of our voice as youth. Me, not so much a youth anymore, kind of transitioning out of OPO stage. But, there's so much that you can do, and so much power that your voice holds, and so much power that your opinion holds. So I think that we need to start teaching our KT that their voice matters, and that their voice has power, and to start doing things at a young age. You don't have to wait till college and beyond to organize a rally, or put together workshops for teachers on education in Hawaii. And I think it's really awesome that we get to have opportunities to talk about it like this.
So following off of what Hina said, I don't know if I'm lagging or not. So following off of what Hina said, yes, we need to educate ourselves and educate the younger people in our community, and make sure that they know their history and how we came to this point, and how we can use this point to use our momentum to keep propelling ourselves, talking to other people of color and understanding their struggles, and seeing how we are the same in some ways, and how we can work together into making our futures better together. Educating ourselves by watching documentaries and talking to your parents and educating them in some ways. Finding fellow students to work with. Yeah. And signing petitions, because even though it may seem like signing the petition might not get it anywhere, your name on that petition just makes it so much more solidified that they know people care, and how we're working to make everybody one and the same.
Talking about a sense of a role, I think personally, youth of today should be a sponge. Soak up everything you possibly can. If youth these days go into situations with a broader perspective, I feel like then when they get older, then they can take that same like level of seeing past others, like other people's differences. I'm essentially the role that youth now should be learning as much as they possibly can, trying to keep an open perspective. And these days, I feel like a lot of youth are activated to do activism, or to be organized, to be a part of the organization, because we are the people who are going to inherit these futures. As Nikkya was kind of saying, we as youth have a very important role in the future, as we will be the upcoming leaders ourselves. And with that, I think more and more of us youth realize the state in which the world is in right now, and how we will have to be the ones to reconcile years of miseducation, misrepresentation, no representation at all, marginalization, economic control, societal, like all of these other facets that build onto what we are living in today as youth. So like my going about it would be being a sponge, because youth, they're also really vulnerable. We're like the newest into this world. You have to be able to look up at your kupuna to learn. So if you are a sponge and, always asking questions, always looking for the best, that would be like my number one piece of advice to continue learning, be a lifelong learner, because I feel like starting at a young age can only just open you up to greater, broader, different perspectives that can help us all in the long run. And then also, so being a sponge, and the main thing for me is being a teacher too. People don't think that kids can teach, because we're just like kids and stuff, but I've learned something from everyone. I love being involved in the communities. That's another thing that I would encourage youth to do, trying to be involved, because you're not learning just from school. There's a proverb, "Ola lono eo," that goes, "A'ole pau ka ʻike, ka halau ho'okahi." That means not all knowledge is learned from one source or one school. And so being able to be involved in your community, in community programs, that's also contributing to solidarity, because you're being with your community, you're learning something constantly from everybody. You don't need to wait just to learn from school. And being able to teach that is the best way to learn it back, spreading your knowledge.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the metaphor of be a sponge, because education right now is really important. Just because, of course, like what I was saying earlier, was that we're the future. So a lot of that comes with voting, not just on a national scale, but on a local scale, because we're trying to better our communities. Voting like for our prosecuting attorney, who's going to be our legislators, things that are coming up right now is really, really important for shaping our future, especially shaping the working class and how we're going to continue to prosper and dismantle a lot of these systems that are against a lot of BIPOC in our communities. And then especially being involved in your community. I know Desiree can definitely relate, just because we did the same community thing, not being taken seriously as like youth. I know it's really, really hard to feel like you can speak over someone when you're really passionate about something, because it's really easy to get drowned out by a lot of adults. It's really easy to be pushed around and told what to do and what you should be doing during a political movement or just in general. And I think it's really important to be willing at times respectfully to push back and say that you know what you're doing. I know what I believe in, and I know what I want to do for my movement. I know what I want to do for my community. I think that's really, really important. I think not even just being willing to push back, but our adults being willing to allow us to do that, allow us to be in those spaces where we don't feel uncomfortable to have our voices heard. And we don't feel uncomfortable to push out our ideas. But it is also important to know that you're going to have those uncomfortable conversations, especially with people that are set in their ways, especially with people that aren't necessarily going to agree with you, especially a lot of our parents, a lot of our grandparents, uncles, all of these other people that don't necessarily have the same views as us. It's really important to have those tough conversations with them, being a teacher to them, being like, hey, I know that you're set in these specific ways, but I see it differently, and I really think that you should get behind a specific movement. Just being willing to put yourself out there is really, really important way that youth can do. Like, not only having a leading role, because that's not always necessary. We can't have leaders without people that are backing behind them. You don't always have to feel like you have to push yourself into a leading role. You don't always have to feel like you have to be the one calling all of the shots. Just being there, being accountable, just all of these other things, like participating in marches, signing petitions, like Desiree said, donating if you can, being someone who's amplifying other voices, that is just as important as being someone who is leading marches, being someone who's calling the shots, talking to legislators. Every single role is important, and you shouldn't always have to feel like you have to be the spotlight and the speaker of a specific movement. You shouldn't have to feel like you are the like head of the Black Lives Matter movement, because that's not what you have to be all of the time. You don't have to be the person that's like, you need to come to me and I'm going to educate you. You have to be open to taking different roles and finding where you belong in a specific movement. And that's the best way to do it. Don't feel like you have to put yourself in a specific role for the acceptance of others. Find your specific place and where you belong in a movement. And if you're really passionate about it, it'll work for you.
Mahalo, everyone. I think the synthesis of what everyone shared so far is making me think of the way we breathe, and the way sometimes we breathe in and we're like sponges and learners, and we listen to our kupuna, and we listen to that the ancestral knowledge that has guided us and our people for generations. And we sit there and we breathe it all in. And then there's also moments, I think, where after all that listening and breathing and knowing the political climate around us and knowing our histories, that then we're ready to breathe out, and to use that breath to speak for our people, speak on behalf of our people, and speak towards a cause that we really believe in. So yeah, I'm thinking about that right now. And Hina, the way you said, if not now, then when? And if not us, then who? I really liked that. I really liked hearing that also in synthesis with what Nikkya was saying about finding the role that feels right for us in a movement. I guess all of those thoughts are kind of leading us towards the question of solidarity, and how do we find the role for us in one another's movements, or how can we as youth from particular communities let other youth know what roles they can play and how they can best support us. So my next question is, how can we be there for each other? How can our communities be accountable to one another? Or how can we show up for each other in good ways? So I feel like this is kind of the heart of this panel, the heart of what we came to discuss about. So if you folks need a little more time on this question, please feel free to take it.
Yeah, I have a few initial thoughts, but I'd love to be able to go back and forth with each other to discuss these kinds of things. But first and foremost, I think we should all be thanking Hoʻihoʻi Ea and Mahina for putting this panel together, because if we want to talk about being there for each other and having these discussions, this is a beautiful way to start doing that. And I think this whole panel was super awesome, and I loved meeting the two of you, Desiree and Nikkya. But also continuing on with that and just cultivating relationships between our communities, not just coming together to fight all the time, growing together, malamaing each other's, just mana'o and aina and whatnot. So the first things that came to mind, at least for me, when talking about how we can be there for each other and different ways to support each other, I thought of a quote from the Panyolo Prince, Hano Hano na Ehu. I'm not sure if you guys have ever watched Anthony Bourdain's special on Molokai when he came, but he was talking about how he's not Hawaiian, but he loves Hawaii and stuff like that. And Uncle Hano told him, you don't have to be Hawaiian to love this aina. And if you, as somebody who's not from here, somebody who's not Hawaiian, can love and care and respect our land and our culture and our values the same in the way that we can be more than friends, we can be family. And I really valued that quote because it breaks down the walls of exclusion, and it values what's really important, which is the relationships and the pilina we have with each other and with the land. And I think that if we're going to talk about building, relationships between our communities, that's where we need to start, with understanding each other, understanding our values and the important things in life, and then channeling that into fighting with each other, being there for each other through all of our struggles and our shared struggles, and yeah, just remembering that quote was the main thing for me. But I love to hear what everybody thinks, and then just having further discussion about it.
I completely wholeheartedly agree with what Hina said. Just having sit-down conversations with other young people or just people in the community that you are interested in, learn about what they have and how in some ways you can relate, and you can have those conversations about how we can fix what happened to both of our communities. And like she said, this panel is a great way to get this started, because I learned a little bit from these two young people that I would have never learned from anybody else. And I think just this should be a snowball effect, not just today, but speaking with other people of different communities and just making sure that we understand each other, and it's not just one community that needs help. Everybody should work together and changing the system of oppression and just trying harder.
I really resonate with what Nikkya said last time on the last question, and how we really have to be able to follow as well. I know some solid leaders in my life, and I came up with the thought around the idea of if you don't have any leaders, I mean, if you don't have any followers, there is no leader, and vice versa. And so being there for one another as a follower, being able to support another leader, just like how within these past few months, there's been a lot of initiative from people all over the world. I've seen countless, and I've signed countless petitions online. And those people that are following the petition, sharing the petition, it goes such a long way. It really is a snowball effect, like Desiree said. And like within these past few months is such a prime example, because it really only starts with one person. And bringing it back to the question, we just have to be there for each other physically, but not only physically, mentally and spiritually, being able to connect with one another in a real, human way, and being able to like organize all of our thoughts around a centered purpose, and that'll propel all of us forward. I think that is really powerful, and that is one of the ways that we can hold each other accountable in our communities, because we are different communities throughout Hawaii, but as Hawaii as a whole, we are one nation. And so being able to have different initiatives within various communities, forwarding them, and then coming to work together, I feel could be really impactful. And like we were talking about, being able to be a follower, which is not always easy, and being able to step down from being a leader. Yeah, and overall being there for each other emotionally, because like everybody has emotion, you can't suppress it, you got to let it come and go. And these kinds of panels, these kinds of talks with people like mind are really, really powerful in my opinion, and is a great way to start.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what all was said about community. I think that as someone who's lived in a lot of states, what's really different here is a sense of community among like every other state that I've lived in. That's something that's really powerful here. That's something that's really important. And I think that's something that we should take advantage of. Going just to the question, being there for each other, like what everyone has been saying, just being willing to be like, what do you need me to do? Whether that's lending a ear, doing something specific as a movement, or just talking with someone. I think that's what's really important when we're supporting each other's movements, just being willing to do whatever for our community to better it. Because I think that's what's really, really important in a respective movement, especially with the power of social media. It's so easy to be able to support people's movements, and especially with teenagers, we all know the extent, like the power of social media and how important that can be in taking off in a movement. I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement definitely would not have been as big as it is right now without social media. And I think that that's why it's really important to be able to speak out, not only there, but within our communities, be able to have talks with people that are not only like-minded, but people that don't necessarily agree with you. Having those conversations of what is the disagreement, how we can work through those is something that's really, really important. Recognizing that we all have the same pressures, we all generally have the same struggles. Like, these are things that are really important when you're talking with your community, knowing that we truly are in this together, especially in this context of the issues that we're going through right now. Just being willing to amplify the voices of the people that are being affected by it, Like I was saying earlier, like we don't always have to be a leader. It's just as important to be able to amplify other people's voices and direct that light or direct people to a specific person or specific movement to learn more about what they can do. And yeah, just being supportive of each other, showing up to events, being willing to give stuff. I know like every single march that the Black Lives Matter movement does always needs water, always needs extra signs, always needs things that you don't necessarily have to buy, because I know signs is really easy to make. Just being willing to be there for each other and support movements so they can be as successful as possible can really shape and have a positive impact on our community.
Mahalo, everyone. What you're sharing actually reminded me of this video. The words you're using, like that we need to learn to be a follower sometimes too. It reminded me of this really funny video. It's called First Follower, the leadership lessons from Dancing Guy. I'm not sure if you folks have seen it, but it's this dude who gets up and starts like dancing in the middle of a crowd that's just sitting down watching him. And in the beginning, he seems pretty crazy because no one's dancing. He just has his like radio right there. But as a couple of close friends get up and join him, then it starts to seem cool. And as more and more people come, like momentum builds and builds for that. And while it's like not as ideologically grounded a movement as many of ours that we're talking about today, like the energy grew. And it made it easier for people to join in. And so I was just thinking of that, how you're articulating really clearly the role of not only a leader, but the followers who make leaders who they are and make movements what they are.
If I could piggyback a little bit some more,
Yeah.
I just wanted to add in a little bit how like most of us were going along this line, but what Nikkya just made me think about, it's important, I feel, to be a follower and to be a leader, but both people, a follower and a leader, having the qualities of like open-mindedness. Like Nikkya really made me realize it's great to have conversations with like-minded people because you can propel your guys's or people's plans, expectation, organizations forward. But like you're saying, being able to talk to someone who completely disagree with you or is even like kind of really, really mean, like I don't want to throw any words, but you know, like is really against your stance, which you will encounter a lot in life. And it kind of just made me come back to like a little bit of reality, a little bit of like everything that we're doing in this. A lot of movements are faced with opposition, are faced with a lot of non-understanding, and in my opinion, deep indoctrination. Indoctrination, I feel, is like a really heavy underlying facet of today's culture, and that's why I also believe education is also super important. And yeah, Nikkya just reminded me to be able to have like that open-mindedness, and that goes back to like the value sets that we're raised in, and really just being able to express how you feel, but also accepting how other people feel. And when we are able to become adept in the skill of communication, you know, I don't think there's many barriers that can that we can't surpass after that.
Mahalo, Anela. Does anyone else want to respond to something that another panelist has shared? I found your connection really powerful. If anyone has something similar, that'd be great to hear too. If not, I have another question to pose. And I really liked all the ideas about supporting one another. I also was struck by the very specific actions, Nikkya, that you mentioned, like when there's a Black Lives Matter march. People need water, people need signs. And that felt like something that we and also people who are listening could take very concrete action And so I was wondering, in each of the movement spaces that you folks have been involved in, like both Black Lives Matter marches and maybe other actions that you have planned, and also Hina and Anela, I know you've both spent time on Mauna Kea. So I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about your experience in those two spaces, and then maybe a couple of concrete actions that allies or youth from other communities could take to support you folks? Yeah, anyone can start if you're ready. Or if you need some time to think, that's fine too.
Well, when I was on Mauna Kea, I met many people up there who were not Hawaiian at all. But there were so many of them who were extremely respectful. I got to make connections with Native Americans, different tribes around the Americas, even way from India, people all over the world, even Korea, you know, China. They see a real problem, and that, you know, that we have to stand together to reconcile. And it's not always going to be youth. It's sometimes going to be kupuna who's fighting for the same thing. It's going to be teenagers. It's going to be babies. Like, I brought my little nephew up there. He's like 2 years old, screaming his head off. But that made me realize, like, you're going to encounter all different kinds of people. So one concrete thing, maybe not physically concrete, but mentally concrete, being able to essentially, this comes with open-mindedness, but looking at another person's, stepping in another person's shoes, you know, being able to remove yourself out of your entire situation in life and look at someone else's perspective in life. I feel that's really valuable. And being able to bring that at any protest, at any, you know, place of activism, any place of reform or justice, having that perspective, having that mental, like, capacity to think outside and to be empathetic or sympathetic to other people's situations. That was one of the main values that I took from Mauna Kea and a lot of the sacred spaces that we stay in. I feel that Mauna Kea and a handful of the other, like, like the protests that I've been involved in pertaining to Wahipana or sacred sites are much more, I feel, in my opinion, heavier, because in a Hawaiian perspective, these places are valuable, these places are sacred, and that is what we have to keep within us. Like, we're not there to protest, and make noise, like make all kind, like a lot of people already know that, like, we're there to hold space for something very sacred.
Just with my experience with the Black Lives Matter movement, similar but definitely not in the same drastic stance. What Anela said was there was so many different types of people that came to our march. I know we had an entire, like, native, like, group that came. They were telling us, like, what reservation they were on, and there was just so many different types of people that were at the Black Lives Matter movement. I think just still continuing to be there for people, not necessarily always having to go to a march. Don't feel like that's something it's important, but doing things like what people have been continuing to push, which is voting, is really something concrete that anyone can do if they're over the voting age. Even if you aren't, pre-registration for voting is at 16 here in Hawaii. This is one of the youngest ages that you can vote in the country. So I think that just being able to do that, if you can now, especially when we're voting for our prosecuting attorney and our legislators, doing things that could put us in the right direction, so that they can vote for things like our fixing our incarceration rates and all these other things, and our funding within our communities. That's really something, and that goes with back to voting, as well as amplifying voices in the communities that are being affected by this. Like we've continued to go back to, we don't have to have a leadership role, so amplifying the voices of the people that are being affected and being willing to listen to those people is really important, as well as educating yourself. There's hundreds and hundreds of books and movies and things that you can read and look at to talk about historical things that have been happening, because especially with their movement, that's a lot of history, hundreds of history that it's been backed behind, as well as ours. There's hundreds and hundreds of years of history that has put us in the place that we are today. And I think really educating yourself on that and recognizing how we got here so that we can figure out how to fix where we are is so, so important, because it's not helpful going into a movement and not necessarily knowing what you're fighting for or knowing why you're fighting for it. Because it's super, super important to know why you're there and know what needs to be done to fix it, because we can't just have a movement where we stand in a place and we say, hey, we want this issue fixed, but not know how to fix it. Because like in the, when the Black Lives Matter movement started in 2016, we had ideas of what they wanted to do to fix the systemic issues that were happening within our communities. Because of course, with the Black Lives Matter movement, it's not individual people that are being racist, it's a systemic issue that does not need racist people in the system to still thrive and work. So it was, we had an issue where we didn't really know what we wanted. Well, I don't want to speak out, but I think that a lot of people just didn't really know where to go from where we were. And that's what a lot of the time made the 2016 movement die down, just because there was no clear path to what we can do. But now that we've recognized the systems that are specifically disproportionately hurting a lot of minorities, like Native Hawaiians, for example, here in Hawaii, we know what needs to be done so that we can actually have a call to action for our legislators and demand them to do specific things, because we can't just tell them to fix this, but then none of us know how. That's how a movement dies down quickly, because you don't have a clear pathway. So I think just continuing to educate yourself so that we're all on the same path, because we all want the same goal. Just right now, we do have different ways of how we're going to fix it. And I think really educating ourselves and talking with each other on solutions so that we can all come to one clear consensus would really help a movement thrive, so that it shows unity instead of division within a movement, because unity is 100% important when you're talking about a movement. And because the Black Lives Matter movement is so big, it's not even on a national scale. I mean, globally right now, the Black Lives Matter movement is in so many different countries. Having that unity is how we get the systems and problems and legislators that are continuing for these things to happen. That's how we get to dismantling them.
For this, mahalo, Nikkya, I really kaka'o everything that you said. I think for this question, two things came to mind. First, it's kind of came at a perfect time. So because of the events that were happening, because of 4th of July celebration, yes, a few days ago, and everything that happened in Kailua the past few days, I think Kumu Jamaica Osori, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. She just put out a bunch of resources for people to read about regarding Hawaiian history. It includes different readings, Kumuleli Kala, Kame'elehiva, Hanani K-Tras, really core people in the Hawaiian movement that, and in the community, I mean, that have kind of set the foundation for this, resurgence of Hawaiian knowledge and connection to land and people. And so I think I kind of shameless plug, I'll recommend looking at the resources that she has provided. And also if you folks are going into the university system, that's kind of like my community right now in academia. There's a really awesome group of youth organizers called Kia Ika Haukani. They are a group of undergrad and I believe some grad students at the University of Hoʻihoʻi Ea, mostly Kānaka, Hawaii, but they are super awesome and solid in organizing around movements here in Hawaii. And I know that a lot of them have supported all of the efforts that you guys have organized over the past few months, and would love to collaborate, more if you guys, I'm not sure if you want to go to UH Manoa, but if you end up going there, there's a group there that's really solid. But yeah, that was my suggestions. I would be just to, read up on the histories of Hawaii, to have those difficult discussions about America's presence in our land, and, even over militarization of our islands, and how that heavily affects a lot of the things that happen. And I think that, just learning about all of those things in terms of like solid, concrete, tangible things that we can do moving forward, and we should be able to do the same. I just joined a book club about Black female feminist theory, and I'm like really loving it right now. It's really awesome, and I'm learning a lot. So yeah, that's my now.
Like Hina said, looking at resources and looking at education of just the resources that, and you can go into further research for yourself. As for concrete, you can challenge your legislators like in a respectful way of putting out your ideas and how you can work with them to change like the system. Like Nakaya said, we do have systematic racism, and we as a youth or a community of people can work together with the system, so like the US government or just local legislators, and to voicing our opinions and how we feel and how we feel they can change, just not, even if it's not on a large scale, even if it's not like Congress or the Senate, we could start with our little communities and work our way up, because it might, like I said before, it's a snowball effect. It might start out little, but as you gain more traction and more support from people, you can change what's happening. And yeah.
I have one quick thought. It's really simple, but I just reminisced. There was a recently at the state capitol. There's like a little rally for Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and so I attended that. And thinking about concrete action, what I really did at that march was stand and chant. Like all I was really doing at that rally at the state capitol was standing in solidarity. And at one point we all raised our hands, and every time there was a shout, I'd yell at the top of my lungs. It was just interesting because after that, I stepped out of the crowd and I had to go home. And there was a man from the Star Advertiser that came up to me and was like, "Oh, I saw that you were so passionate. Can I get some words from you?" And then it was cool because he found out I was from Hello Kumana, and his wife actually started working at Hello Kumana this year. And he's like a Star Bulletin advertiser. So I was like, wow, that was super interesting. But all I really did was stand there. I had a good posture. I was being intent and I was listening. So concrete, a concrete way of supporting is being there. It's being present, not only physically, mentally, as I've said, spiritually, emotionally, but really paying attention. Because as I said, like you can learn something from everybody. And yeah, that was just an interesting example because I've been to a lot of marches, haven't had a lot of news people come up to me, but that was cool because it wasn't a Hawaiian march, but just somebody saw the passion within me, and having the passion within you can ignite somebody else. That's pretty concrete to me.
Is there anything anyone would want to respond back to that, or Maikai? Okay. So I wanted to say mahalo nui to each of you for standing here today with us. I'm just so inspired by the collective futures and the visions of solidarity that each of you shared today. For all the youth watching, I hope you're reminded that each of us have really beautiful, daring imaginations, and that together we have the capacity to make collective change. And for Kumu and Makua, I know there's a lot of you there too, and I urge you to listen to the young people in your lives and to take the futures that we're envisioning really seriously. At the start of this panel, I reminded us of Fran Fanon's words, "We revolt simply because, for many reasons, we can no longer breathe." This still holds true today. But our panel also reminds me that at the same time, there are so many reasons why we should dare to breathe and to breathe together. So a deep mahalo to each of our panelists for being here and for all of the amazing work that you do. Also wanted to mahalo all of you for joining us and mention that each week our Hoʻihoʻi Ea Hui will be putting out a challenge to participants. And this week's challenge is to take and post a picture that represents one or more of the Ea-driven futures that youth articulated today. If you tag @Hoʻihoʻi Ea on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, you'll be entered in a drawing for some cool merch. So, and we hope to see you all next Monday, same time, same place, for our next Hoʻihoʻi Ea event. So, ahui ho kākou.